What's up guys, back with another educational video, and this week, erythritol is gonna kill you. But first, just speeding up my own demise. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment for the algorithm. A new paper just came out and it's getting a lot of press coverage. The headlines and the Fitfluencers are saying, new paper shows erythritol causes heart disease. I got sent this paper by probably 1,500 people asking for my opinion. And after reading the paper, I am not shocked to say that these claims are being drastically overblown based on what the paper actually was. But before we get started, let's talk about what erythritol actually is. So erythritol is a polyol produced endogenously by your body via the pentose phosphate pathway. So it is something that gets naturally produced. It has a sweet taste. It's about 60 to 70% as sweet as sugar or sucrose, but it contains a fraction of the calories. So 1 gram of erythritol only has like 0.2 calories in it. So it's a very, very low calorie sweetener with a very similar taste to sucrose. And while it's less sweet, the sweetness profile is very similar and there's no odor or really any aftertaste with it. So it has become a popular sweetener for many beverages, including my dear White Monster. No, this video was not paid for by Monster. No, I do not get paid by Monster. Yes, I like to drink White Monsters. So with all that out of the way, what did this study look at? First off, it's important to note that this study was not assessing erythritol intake in these subjects. They were looking at erythritol as a metabolite, meaning they took blood samples from this population and looked at how much erythritol was in their blood. At no point and nowhere in the paper did they look at their intake of dietary erythritol. So this paper looked at blood levels of erythritol and then over a 3-year time period looked at how many people had cardiovascular disease events, how many people died from cardiovascular disease, and then looked at what the hazard ratio was with erythritol. Now I'm gonna butcher a little bit what hazard ratio is, but let's say your hazard is a cardiovascular disease event or death. If something has a hazard ratio of say 1.7, it means there is a relative risk increase of 70% that that event could occur. So for example, if something has an absolute rate of 10% and there is a hazard ratio of 1.7 associated with whatever biomarker they're looking at, that means that risk jumps up to 17% in the presence of high levels of that compound or whatever level was assessed. So in this study, they showed that the hazard ratio was pretty high. It was like around 2. So basically a 100% increase in the relative risk. Again, let's say the absolute risk is 10%. I'm making this number up. That means it goes up to 20%. It doesn't mean that it's like 110% now. So it was a pretty high hazard ratio. It was comparing the lowest level of erythritol in the blood versus the groups with the highest level of erythritol in the blood. So the headline takeaway has been that erythritol causes heart disease and erythritol is going to shorten your life. Biggest thing is they were looking at blood levels of erythritol and not erythritol intake. The second thing is the subjects they were examining were very, very, very sick people. Over 15% of them had heart failure. Over 40% have already had a heart attack or a myocardial infarction. Over 70% had coronary artery disease. Over 25% were type 2 diabetics. And over 70% were hypertensive. So these are very, very, very high-risk individuals that are very sick. Why does it matter that they didn't measure erythritol intake versus just blood levels of erythritol? Well, the first thing is you have the opportunity for reverse causality here, which is it could be just as likely that people with this disease profile produce more erythritol as part of metabolic dysfunction. And indeed, in people with obesity, type 2 diabetes, and in some people with cardiovascular disease, the pentose phosphate pathway is more activated. It's producing more substrate. I'm not saying that this is a bad study. It is possible there could be something here. But I'm curious as to why they didn't do any dietary recalls to see if these people consume erythritol as a regular part of their diet. Another thing they did in the study was they took people and had them intake erythritol. It was like 8 subjects or something like that, and looked at how much erythritol went up in their blood, and they found that when they took it in, it increased their plasma levels of erythritol. And I guess their point to that was, if you consume erythritol, it can increase erythritol levels in the blood. Reasonable. Then they took erythritol in an in vitro experiment and looked at how it affected platelet function. And they found that erythritol, when applied directly to a petri dish, to blood platelets, negatively impacted their function. That is not something I'm going to get very excited about. When you put things in vitro and you add compounds directly to them, very, very often you observe something strange happening. Right now, the safety data on erythritol is very, very good. It doesn't affect glycemia. In fact, there's some studies that suggest it may help with weight loss and may help improve insulin sensitivity. But this study in particular is much more likely to be a case of reverse causality, which is people who are this sick produce a lot of metabolic byproducts that they wouldn't normally produce at that level because they are so sick. And once again, people with this metabolic profile have been shown to have a much more active pentose phosphate pathway. So I think what you're probably observing here is people who are not getting sick because they have high levels of erythritol, but have high levels of erythritol in their blood because they are so sick. And it's likely the sicker they become, the greater the level of erythritol in their blood, which is why there appears to be a dose response in the blood of erythritol with cardiac events and mortality. I'm not saying you should go take in erythritol. I'm not saying that we shouldn't explore this further. We should absolutely explore it further. However, based on this single study, where again, dietary intake of erythritol was not examined, and there was no attempt at doing any kind of dietary recall logs, I am not willing to say that this study is good evidence that erythritol is dangerous. In fact, I think it's much like TMAO, where everybody got real bent out of shape about TMAO, and it just turns out that people who are really sick end up producing a lot of TMAO. I think for the question they wanted to answer, which was, does erythritol in the blood correlate with cardiac events and mortality, the study design was appropriate. But it was not appropriate to draw the conclusion that erythritol consumption somehow leads to heart disease and death. So if y'all want to skip on the erythritol, you can. In the meantime, I'll keep drinking the demon juice. If you like these study breakdowns, make sure you subscribe to my research review reps. Every month we review 5 studies that are relevant for fitness and nutrition and break them down in a way that's palatable and easy for anyone to understand. It's only $12.99 a month. And when you sign up, not only do you get access to our current issue, but you get access to all our archived issues, and you get access to our ebook, How to Read Research Guide. This guide is basically teaching you how to fish, not just giving you a fish, so that if you want to read certain studies, you can learn what to look for. It's an excellent guide, and it comes free as part of your reps membership. So at only $12.99 a month, I really feel like this is a great value. This is as cheap or cheaper than most of the other research reviews out there. And I feel like, quite frankly, it's better. So I hope you guys check it out, subscribe, and I will catch you next week.